My name is Matthew Hips, and this is my functional area analysis for strategic enrollment management. My functional area is financial aid. As the U.S. Department of Education notes, financial aid is funding that is available exclusively to students attending a post-secondary educational institution in the United States. This funding is used to assist in covering the costs incurred in the pursuit of post-secondary education. Since the passage of the Higher Education Act of 1965, there has been increased attention on the role that financial aid can and does play in closing gaps in college enrollment among qualified students. Understanding financial aid at institutions of higher education only occurs with a strong recognition of the contexts that help shape the interactions between various players in the government, students and their families, and the many higher education institutions across the United States. Financial aid in the United States is inextricably linked with the broader social context that exists within the country. Rising costs have become the focus of legislators, parents, and college administrators across the country. According to an analysis of the U.S. Census Bureau of Labor Statistics and the National Center for Education Statistics, over the past 40 years, college costs have increased by 169%. During this same time period, earnings for workers between the ages of 22 and 27 have increased by just 19%. These types of statistics have brought the cost of college to the forefront of conversations. Financial aid units must constantly be prepared to address these rising costs to various constituencies. Additionally, the broader political climate within the country affects the ways in which institutions are able to offer aid and support to their students. It also impacts the trends within financial aid policy and practice. Whether or not Congress and the President decide that student financial aid is a focal point has a significant impact on federal budget decisions, such as Pell Grant funding. The party in power can also have a significant impact on tuition, fees, and other federal subsidies for higher education. Student loan default has also become an increasingly important context from which to understand financial aid. The U.S. Department of Education reports that approximately 20% of borrowers are in default. Complicating matters even more is that even when students are able to get their student loans into good standing, about 25% end up back in default. In addition, institutions with high default rates can lose out on financial aid opportunities, lose students due to a concern that the institution may not support them in repayment strategies post-graduation, and in extreme cases, even cause institutions to close. Finally, the ever-present battle between whether or not higher education is a business or a collective goal continues to rage. This is complicated because students are both the inputs and outputs in the systems. As such, institutions must find ways to support students in pursuing higher education and offer them financial assistance to meet their needs, while at the same time finding ways to utilize revenue to support the very programs that help these students to persist through their institutions. Given the many contexts in which financial aid operates, there are four basic approaches that institutions tend to take in disseminating financial aid. Only the most selective, wealthy institutions continue to be able to utilize a purely need-blind approach, or one where there is no regard for family financial situation, but full student demand for aid is still met. Most institutions operate under one or some combination of the following approaches. There's need-based financial aid, that is aid that students are eligible to receive if they have a documented financial need and meet other criteria specified by the institution. Need-aware financial aid, where the full demand is met, but admissions decisions are able to consider the financial need of the family in question. Meet less than the full need, which is the most common, where financial need is met according to the FAFSA and other funding sources, and merit-based financial aid, which is aid that is offered as a reward or recognition for student achievement. There are also varied sources of financial aid that institutions can rely on to create comprehensive financial aid packages for their students. The federal government relies on three main types of financial aid support to institutions: grants, that are gift aid that does not need to be paid back, loans, which is borrowed money that must be paid back, and work study, which is earned money that does not need to be paid back. State aid is assistance that a state offers eligible residents to help reduce educational costs. Almost every state has its own proprietary state financial aid system. These vary in terms of funding sources and levels of support. It is important to note that contributions from both the federal government and state governments have declined in recent years, though we did see a small uptick as a result of the pandemic. Institutional aid can take on many forms. It can be offered in athletic scholarships, tuition waivers, work study, grants, academic scholarship, and other forms of institutional funding. And finally, private outside sources can include any source of aid external to the institution. So the purpose of campus-based aid has always coalesced around four primary goals. First, to broaden access, specifically that financial aid should allow those who could not traditionally afford college to gain access. In doing this, financial aid would provide equity. It would redistribute income from those who had a lot back to those who had a little to equalize the educational playing field. And finally, it would reward talent, whether academic, athletic, or artistic. The initial model was based on the notion that students could choose their secondary education based on merit. This shifted a bit in the 80s and 90s as financial aid was called upon to do even more on college campuses. Today, financial aid departments are expected to play a role in increasing the academic profile, increasing class sizes, and supporting the financial health of the institution. Additionally, financial aid plays a key role in helping to stimulate interest in majors and professions that are needed throughout the country through scholarships, grants, and other research opportunities, and in stabilizing the overall educational system in America. In navigating costs, financial aid offices must find ways to communicate complicated financial and mathematical ideas to a population that is largely unfamiliar with them. There are two main theories of costs that financial aid departments tend to rely on. First is the revenue theory of costs, which notes that costs are a function of increased revenue, which thus increases the expectations of the institution. More simply, the more money an institution has, the more amenities and services the institution is expected to provide. In this theory, the only limit on expenditures that the college makes are the revenue that you generate. So essentially, your expenditures are only limited by your potential revenue. Cost disease theory offers that higher education is extremely specialized and complex and becoming more complex by the day. And thus we can expect costs to increase to support this specialization and complexity. Within these theories of cost, there are several types of costs that are particularly salient to financial aid professionals. First are production costs. These are the underlying costs of instruction. These include salaries, facilities, and benefits being offered to employees. Next is tuition or the sticker price. This is the published cost of tuition. It tends to exclude other fees and costs associated with attendance at college. The total cost are fees including all tuition, books, room and board, and other associated costs. And finally is the net price, which is the total cost of attendance less all financial aid received. Even though the national conversation tends to focus on sticker price, particularly in conversations surrounding the rising cost of college, institutions want to shift the focus back to the net price. If the conversation is able to shift to net price, which includes financial aid packages that the institution offers, colleges and universities feel that this more accurately represents the actual price of attending college. Given the complicated tapestry of theories, costs, and sources of financial aid, one of the most important aspects of any effective financial aid department is communication. Institutions must be careful to effectively communicate all institutional costs to potential admits. Additionally, there must be clear communication between financial aid and admissions to ensure that both parties are working collaboratively to recruit the appropriate students given the institutional mission and type. All communication regarding financial aid must be appropriate to the audience that you are serving. Simplifying the message can be essential to ensuring that the target population understands all of their potential options regarding financial aid. Financial aid is an integral part of strategic enrollment management. Financial aid offices no longer operate as academically adjacent offices, but rather as a cohesive and comprehensive part of a larger enrollment management strategy on college campuses. Financial aid is not only about getting into school, but about the ability of students to be retained and persist through their academic course of study. Financial aid professionals must understand the science of financial aid to be the most effective. An understanding and familiarity with econometrics and predictive analytics will help financial aid departments to shape and respond to trends in the external environment. This will continue to be critically important as enrollments continue to increase and state support decreases. Additionally, financial aid professionals must ensure that institutions are working within an ethical framework that considers not only the revenue generated, but also the institutional responsibility to support this growth with the appropriate resources. When utilized correctly, financial aid does not just assist students at the university, but also helps the university to meet other critical institutional goals and objectives.